Welcome to For the Love of Books, Bees Books Edition, a podcast by North Lanarkshire Libraries.
Hello, this is Pari.
And this is Jenny, and we're here to talk about
Bees Books. Well, hopefully we're here to talk about it. I might have to take breathing breaths because I'm still recovering from the flu, tragically.
Yes, Pari has been poorly.
I have, and it's very irritating.
Yes.
I hate being ill. I'm a terrible ill person. No one should have to go through illness with me. My poor partner had to. But he's the one who made me ill, so serves him right.
I must admit, when I'm not well, I like to just be left alone. Just, in a dark room, just leave me alone.
Yeah.
Every now and again, just stick your head through the door, but don't talk to me or make eye contact unless I make eye contact with you.
Oh yeah, that's good. Yeah. I like my house has fallen apart around me because I just couldn't be bothered worrying about anything except myself.
Yes.
It was quite a luxury. It was quite nice.
Yes. You forget when you're wee and you're unwell, there's somebody looking after you and the rest of the house. Yeah. But when you're a grown up, it doesn't work like that.
I don't know how they do it. Just the other week, last week, a few days ago, one of my regular book bug parents was in with her child, and I was we were catching up, and I was telling her with the flu, and she's like, ever since I've had him, I have not been able to be sick because I'm the one who has to do everything.
Exactly.
Which sounds horrible.
Yes.
Good luck to all the parents out there with the flu.
Definitely.
But anyway, we finally did manage to record our episode, delayed, but still we're recording. Unless I stop breathing and then have to rush to the hospital. But the theme that Bee gave us this week was a very sing-songy one.
Yes.
It was Chasing Waterfalls.
It was indeed, yes. Which I've had in my head for the last 2 weeks. If we were going to delay the recording today, I think I would have had to have, done something drastic. Because I think today, once we've talked about it, the song will be out of my head. And not that it's a bad song, I like the song.
I didn't... So I knew the that refrain, like the chorus, don't go chasing waterfalls, just that. Didn't know anything around the song because I don't think I had encountered TLC as its entity too much. But then I did some research about the song and the interpretation of the song, and I was like, oh, this is quite dark. Quite a dark song that you have in your head, Jenny, right now.
Which is why I need rid of it. I need Elvis in my head or something.
Maybe next time. So what book have you bought for the darkness?
So I have chosen two, and I have not went with the darkness.
Oh, okay.
Well, the first one is called Water.
Oh, lovely.
By John Boyne. Because I was trying to find waterfalls and just came up with the sea. There was no waterfalls. However, it's got quite a dark storyline to it in its way, so that kind of fits.
Also, if someone falls into the sea,
yes,
it works.
Sorry, B, we're trying to squish things in as usual. Another one is very literal.
Okay.
And it is Sherlock Holmes, and it is the story where he dies, basically.
The Rhinebeck Falls.
Yes, thank you for saying that, because I was quite unsure about
I am actually very unsure. I just said it with the confidence of a flu-ridden brain.
Yes. But I've chosen the last story and a couple of other stories as well.
Nice.
But obviously there is the big waterfall scene where he dies. So that's what I've chosen. What have you chosen?
Well, I have gone more metaphorical than you have. So my book's called Extremely Online, The Untold Story of Fame, Influence and Power on the Internet by Taylor Lorenz. And to answer your very puzzled expression, like I said, I went and researched what Chasing Waterfalls means because I'd heard of the song, knew, like I said, the lyric, but didn't know what it meant in the context. And in the context of the song, and it's become a phrase in its own right after, is basically, it's like a cautionary tale against the kinds of dreams, following the kinds of dreams that seem really cool and seem really something that you really want, but you don't think through the consequences of for chasing those dreams. So don't go chasing waterfalls is like don't chase the dreams that you think are going to make you happier, but actually, or richer or whatever, but actually you're not seeing the tolls of it. And that's exactly what this book is about, because it's a history of social media. So Taylor Lorenz, she like me, I think we might be of a similar age, has grown up on the internet, and so have I. Have grown up online. But this book is about sort of a social cultural history of social media specifically, and the people who've become really famous on different social media platforms, and the platforms themselves, how both the platforms and the people have influenced not just each other but like the world now, because so much of the world is on social media, and both the upsides and the downsides of chasing waterfalls of online fame.
Excellent. I'm hanging on there. Yes, I can see where you're going.
Yeah. I went purely TLC inspired there.
Excellent.
So, do you want to talk about one of your books?
I do. I want to talk about Water by John Boyne. So, John Boyne is the author of The Boy in Striped Pyjamas and so much more. One of my favourite books is the book that I can't remember the title of. It is called...
Must have left quite an impression.
The Heart's Invisible Furies. Sorry, John Boyne. It's an absolute wonderful book. It will make you absolutely cry if you've any kind of heart whatsoever. It's a wonderful book, but it's quite a big book. This book is, as you can see, quite a skinny book. It's quite not a short story as such, but it's not a novella of sorts. Yes, but as far as I can tell, I think there's going to be 4 of them. So Water, Air, Earth, Fire, and Water is the first one.
Okay.
And it's basically... I've just realised the title of the book.
I also just saw it. I wasn't
it's
going
on the front
to say.
of this book, author of The Heart's Invisible Furies. If I'd looked at the front of the book,
I was going to ignore it and be kind.
He also wrote a great book, as an aside, about Crippen. Back in the historical times, Crippen was like a doctor who murdered his wife. And, it's kind of a true thing. But when you think of Crippen, you kind of think that he murdered like loads of people, and he only kind of murdered his wife. But John Boyne kind of has a slight twist to this story, which is very good. I'm not going to spoil it for anybody, but that's a really good story as well. However, I'm talking about Water. So basically, it starts with this woman who goes to an island even, just off the coast of Ireland, basically to live out her life, or to find herself, I think is really what she's going to do. And through the course of the book, you find out that she had a very bad husband. Something bad happened. Basically, she's came to this island to kind of find herself, and basically to discover if she is culpable for anything that happened, if she could have changed things, if she could have influence things, if she had noticed certain things. So basically, I'm going to slightly spoil it because I need to. You find out her husband was head of the kind of national swimming team for girls, and he was bad. He did some bad things, and a lot of girls suddenly come forward and say what happened. And it's kind of her on the island, but she has like flashbacks to what happened. And she had 2 daughters, and one of them drowned in the sea. And you kind of learn more as you go along about what happened. There's a lot in it for such a small novella. There's an awful lot in it, but there's not any kind of fluff around it. It's very much, her trying to find herself and your journey with her to see where she goes. And it's a very good story. As usual, John Boyne's very good at kind of making you feel what the characters are feeling. It's very much, when I was reading it, you kind of felt as if you were on an island and there was nobody else about you apart from a couple of key players on the island, and she's there hopefully where nobody's going to know her, and she shaves her hair off, she changes her name, just so she can live anonymously and try and work things out in her head.
Does it work?
Yes and no. So we follow the story with her about what happened, and where they are now. He's off to prison when her daughter's died, and the other daughter was kind of in that blaming mum because she should have noticed what happened and could have stopped things. And at the end, there's the daughter kind of explains why she's angry so much, and there's a slight twist there. And it does, she leaves the island and goes back to sort things out at home, I think, to go and sell her house and, you know, move on, basically. She has a wee kind of affair on the island as well. There's a wee bit of love interest there, which again I think she needs, because she needs to know that living with him didn't destroy her, if you know what I mean, and you know, she's still desirable and has desires herself, kind of a thing. It is quite a hard subject, but it's dealt with really well. And I think what's going to happen is that the next book is about somebody else on the island who gets on the boat and leaves when she leaves, and it's going to be their story of what happens to them.
I was just going to ask whether the 4 books will be following her, or if
no, it seems to be like, and possibly the book after that will be somebody else that we meet in that story. So they're kind of a side a character that you kind of meet because they basically try to run away. And they're brought back, but there's a bit of her that kind of is standing on the beach thinking, is this another young person that's drowned? Is this another young person that's been affected by the people around them?
That's really interesting that he seems to have planned it like that right from the get-go, in that, like you said, there's going to be 4 different themes, so I'm assuming that he must have, you know, that sort of cyclical thing that you meet a character and then you follow that character in the next book, versus who's your favourite writer there, Frederick Backman, where my grandmother sends her regards and apologizes. I wonder, and there's the one after that is Brit Marie was here. I wonder in that case if that is what happened, or in the process of writing, the writer realized that actually this random side character that I'm writing about seems really weird in a good way, and I want to know what happens to her next. And because the kind of story, I haven't read that one yet, Brit Marie was here, but from what you've said about it, it seems completely different, like in terms of and you've spoken about that in the podcast before, but the first book I loved it. But this one, like the theme, the sort of treatment, it all seems like completely different. So it's just really, like, just from a writer's perspective, really fascinating, and from a reader's perspective.
I quite like that. It's like prequels, as we were talking about earlier. We were talking about Suzanne Collins doing prequels. You know, you wonder if they fall in love, as it were, with a character when they're writing a story, and suddenly think, I want to explain this character more by going back and, you know, their backstory, basically, or whether they just, you know.
That's true, because in the Hunger Games, like that came out more than 10 years ago now, or 10 about roughly that time. But the first prequel, which was on Snow, was not, I think, like when it was announced, it wasn't super well received. Like people were excited about Suzanne Collins because they like her writing. But the character of Snow, they were like, we don't want to know about this.
No, I was just talking about that this morning. He's a bad man, and I don't want to know if he was good before he was bad.
Or like to get to know him as
But then there is a small part of me that kind of does want to know if he was just bad from the get-go. Or whether...
But or like circumstances made it like that. Like I think... I read it? I think I might have listened to the audiobook. The reason that I would want to sort of explore it would be because I like my villains to not be fully black and, you know, like sort of heroes and villains. I like the sort of nuances and like even the motivations for, like you said, you getting to know this character in water from her perspective, like you're on the island. So like even getting through a villain's perspective, like reading it from that perspective, you'd be like, okay, from his worldview, this makes complete sense, which could be quite interesting, I think. And the next one, obviously, is Haymitch, who's a really beloved...
yes, I'm quite excited about that, I have to say. Only heard from you today that
I think it was only announced a few days ago, and like I said, the online world is abuzz. Speaking of which, so Taylor Lorenz is a journalist that I'd not really heard about much, but I think I must have read like a few of her pieces online.
Is she British or American?
No, American, from the US, and she's basically made a name for herself writing about internet culture. So because she's very much a part of it, like I said, she's grown up with it, but she's also been the main character, as the kids say, of the internet in both good and bad ways for a really long time. Like people either love her, hate her, love to hate her, like all these things. She's been really targeted really brutally by like harassment, doxing, which is like her personal details have been leaked, targeted bullying online. So she's not had like a great time of it. She doesn't write, she refers to it a little bit in this book, but doesn't go too much in depth about the kind of harassment that she's faced. But it's really interesting what she does choose to focus on. So like I said, I've grown up online as well, and I know some of the things, like the platforms that she talks about so early, like MySpace, LiveJournal, Tumblr, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and some things that came and went with it. But I think this would be a really great book. Like, I really enjoyed it, but I think it would be a fantastic book for anybody who's interested in learning about the online sort of history, but doesn't know it too familiarly, but is interested in knowing about it. Because I don't think it goes too in depth into these things. Like, it's not this really serious kind of investigation or critical analysis of the kinds of things that are happening, but it is like a accumulation of, oh, look at all these things that have happened and how this one thing led to the other. So it's light, even though it talks about things that are difficult sometimes. It's just like a sort of a fluffy history lesson of the internet. And it was really interesting. I found it really fascinating because I grew up in India online, and even though platforms were similar, there were different corners of the internet, and our internet didn't seem to have crossed over a lot, like the kinds of people that she talks about. And she especially talks a lot about young people's internet habits, like teenagers now and teenagers like 10 years ago as well. And it's so completely, I don't know, like, I find it so fascinating that how the idea of mainstream media has shifted. Like for you and I, even among you and I, like what is your mainstream media? Like what you would consider mainstream media, I think might be different from what I would consider mainstream media. But in this, she writes about how there's a bunch of like YouTubers, TikTok stars, Instagram influencers and creators for whom like teenagers, but also like adults and things, they've become so popular and we've never even heard their names, you know, but they have like, she talks about the economics of it as well a little bit, where she talks about how they've carved out this new way of making money and they've gotten really rich off it, like absurdly rich. And people in like Hollywood, people in like publishing, like traditional publishing arms, tend not to take them too seriously because they're like, oh, you know, we've had to like work upwards, like from the bottom to the top in these traditional media places, whereas they've just like rocked up with an Instagram thing and like they're making millions of dollars for like posts. But she really talks about how much work is involved. Because you look at social media and you're like, oh, they're just posting fashion stuff or food stuff or like their life stuff. But actually it takes a lot of work, like this extremely online lifestyle. Like the amount of work they have to post constantly. They have to post every day because there's so many people out there that they're just gonna, if they leave, there'll be someone to replace them. But the toll that takes on your mental health then is the chasing waterfalls-ness of it, which is like a lot of people have either been targeted like she has and been bullied offline, or it's just messed up with their brains so much that they've been depressed. So this idea of a life that, oh, you know, my life I don't need to be like working in the way that maybe my parents were working. I can just be online, posting stuff online. And that's such a cool life. But then after years of doing that, they realize that actually this is not the kind of life. And so many people have quit as well. But then there's always other people to sort of replace them. And I think it's just like, I'm someone who's really interested in online culture. So anybody I think who is similarly interested and maybe not as familiar, this is such a eye-opening book, I think, in both good and bad ways, but just the amount of work that's involved, I think, is really, I'm like, you know, there are people who think that they're just going to become influencers overnight, and that's not, it's such a mix of being the correct place at the correct time, but also all the work involved. So just really fascinating book.
The thing is, the world changes so very quickly, so something that you think is going to be great now in 2 weeks time might not be, and if you put all that work in and then all of a sudden
absolutely,
it doesn't happen.
100%. And she writes about that as well, like a lot of people. So Vine was this really short-lived short-form video platform, like pre-TikTok. It was, I think, by the same people who did Twitter. And people became really popular there and really famous. But then the platform creators couldn't figure out the economics of it, how to make money, because they have all their venture capitalist money thing. So the platform shut down, or like it died. And it was like both an influence of the platform, the sort of people who own the platform, but also the people who are making the platform popular. And once like a lot of the top names left, the middling names, they were like you said, like, oh, this is where we put all our stuff in, and now we have to like branch out on TikTok or YouTube, because TikTok as well. So in India, TikTok got really popular like pre-pandemic as well. I think here in the West, TikTok got really popular during the pandemic in 2020, because people were at home and had nothing to do and were turning on to online entertainment. But in India, it had become really popular before, a few years before, and interestingly really popular amongst like smaller towns and rural, like villages, rural areas and things. So where people who don't have maybe the language or the network connections that people in big cities would have, they were getting a lot of fame, a lot of popularity, and a way to talk back against the kinds of stories that are told about them in, say, like a Bollywood, like a big time movie or something. And it was really interesting that, but then the government, because the Indian government and the Chinese government like has this sort of weird issues like that I can't go into because I'm not much like experienced in it. But India banned it. India banned TikTok, and overnight, like there was no, like, all these people lost their platforms. The US now is like considering banning TikTok as well. I think next year or something they're trying to figure out for different issues, for like national security issues, or so they claim. So what do you do? What do you do when you've all... But I suppose that's the same with traditional media as well, with libraries, with like anywhere now. I think that's the way the world has become. That there is
change. Politics change, just environment changes, and it's changes happen.
And that level of certainty that I think even a couple of decades ago that a lot of people took for granted, like, oh, this is a secure job or a secure sort of way of life or whatever, isn't really secure anymore. No. Not in government jobs, not in academic jobs, not in like a lot of jobs, because like you said, of the economy, of the politics and all changing, it influences that. And this is a good reflection, I think, of that, making you think about real world things as well. But just really interesting.
I'm interested as well in the fame side of it, because if you're just suddenly on one of these platforms doing stuff, posting your dinner, whatever it is that you do, I'm not up to speed with all that kind of stuff, but all of a sudden you're famous, and then like that, if you get bad feedback or things like that, you don't have the skills to deal with that.
Absolutely.
And it's the same, if you're a famous actor or whatever, at least you've got, if you go through the process of going to the drama schools and things like that, at least you're getting something there. Whereas if you just throw yourself in and are not prepared for that, that must be difficult.
Especially when you're really young, like a lot of these people like are teenagers whose parents are like, you can't make a career on the internet until they see like their bank statement, and they're like, oh, maybe you can make a career on the internet. But neither the parents nor the kids know how to deal with this. But in the end, I think, so like, again, I was reading an interview with her, and she said that she thinks it's the platforms that are really fueling this toxic culture of, but like even for people who are on social media, like this mental health decline, because they want people to stay on forever, just scrolling endlessly without really forming like good ways of being online. So she thinks that despite all the bad stuff, there needs to be new ways of being online, because she thinks that the connection that the internet offers, the connections to people and to communities, is really valuable, and it would, and like I for sure 100% agree with that, because for me the internet has given me so much of that, like connections and communities, and it would be a shame to lose out on that, and that's what we need in the real world. Not that the internet is not the real world, but in the offline world as well, like more opportunities for connection and communities. But it's a bit difficult to do that even in like the offline world, because of the way the systems that we don't really control, but that we live in, both online and offline work. It's like making us more isolated and not as like a part of each other's lives as much, which is why I really like the like working in the library, because you do there feel that sense of connection and community, even if it is not superficial, but even, well, sometimes superficial, but even if it's just fleeting. You know, that kind of, like you'd said this before, that for a lot of people who come in, we might be the only people that they talk to in the day, and even that's so valuable.
Exactly. I have no easy way to segue into my other book. I was trying to think there, how can I, but I'm just going to start talking.
Just do it.
Anyway, so I'll do it quickly. So the copy that I got was a collection of Sherlock Holmes books, and on the front, as you can see, it's the fairly decent TV version with Benedict Cumberbatch and
Martin Freeman?
Yes, thank you very much. And the nice thing about this version is that Mark Gatiss and Stephen Moffat have done a wee kind of paragraph before each story.
Right.
So they've selected each story and, you know, joined it up in no particular order. Just they liked this one with submarines in it, so they popped it in.
Yeah, just vibes.
Yes, and it's lovely because obviously they were very much involved in the Sherlock, the recent Sherlock. And the story that I wanted to talk about is the one where he goes to the waterfall?
Rheinbach
Thank you very much.
I don't know if that's correct. Sorry, German people.
And it's called The Final Problem. And Mark and Stephen have put in a wee paragraph at the front. From the opening melancholy paragraph, this is a story like no other. Sherlock at the height of his powers up against the Napoleon of crime, Moriarty. And basically, Holmes doesn't see a way out. Moriarty, you know, has been getting bigger and bigger and bigger in crime circles, and basically he wanders off around Europe while something's supposed to be happening in London to get the whole of the gang, but Holmes knows that that's not actually what's going to happen, and it ends up at this waterfall. Watson is called away for a medical emergency, and when he comes back, finding out that medical emergency was not real, Holmes has gone, and basically there's sort of footprints and things like that make it clear that him and another person, who we assume Moriarty, has went into the waterfall and been squished around. We all kind of know the story, even if we've not read the story, we've seen different versions of it. One of my favourites is the Jeremy Brett playing Sherlock Holmes, that version of when it happens. I did like the modern version right enough, where he goes off the top of the building, and then the story when Holmes reappears again is really good as well, because obviously Watson knows nothing. He assumes that Holmes has died, you know, he's, you know, very sad but gone with his life, and then all of a sudden Holmes is there, and it's like, oh, but the story itself, when you think he dies, is very good. But again, like John Boyne, we forget, because we've seen these things on screen, that the stories were actually quite short. You know, that story itself is basically hardly any time at all. So it goes from page, sorry, this is great, sort of 80 to 95, you know, it's only 15-20 pages long, but when you see it on screen, it's like a 2 hour or a 1 hour thing, and a lot of the stories were like that. After reading that, and you know, the one where he comes back, I read a few others, and apart from The Hound of the Baskervilles, which is quite a chunk, the rest of them are quite short stories. They're kind of bus journey stories, if you know what I mean.
I think I might be wrong or remembering, but I think they were published as newspapers first.
Yeah.
So I don't even know if it was like all together or in parts.
I think it was kind of like serialised,
right.
you know, that it was kind of over time,
yeah.
And it was like these kind of wee bites, and because it was basically Watson telling the kind of story, it worked quite well.
So I found a way to connect a delayed segue is that speaking of fame, Sherlock Holmes and his stories was so popular. So this story that you talked about, Arthur Conan Doyle got tired of fed up of writing of him, killed him off. But the people weren't having it because they loved it so much that they wrote letters, they wrote their own fan fiction. They were outraged and furious that he would kill this beloved character off like this, that he was forced to then bring him back in a way that I don't think he'd actually planned to do it, connecting to the first thing of writers' sort of intentions and things. And I really like, so you mentioned the modern version of it. In that the BBC Sherlock thing, so he falls off the building and is presumed dead, but then later there's like an episode which doesn't explain how it is that he managed to survive, but it has all these different theories, like everyone has a theory about how he survived, and that reflects like its original history a bit, because after Arthur Conan Doyle killed him off, there were people like making up all these theories of like, no, he must have. Sherlock Holmes, he's the cleverest man alive. Like, he must have. This is what he's done. So I love that, you know, the fiction playing into like how audiences receive it and them creating their own narratives.
I quite like as well that in the back of his head, Conan Doyle must have, you know, because it wasn't a final, you know, there was no body, there was no, you know, there were certain clues left, but nothing, you know, really, really hard that you would say that that's actually happened. And you wondered if in the back of his head
he wasn't ready to let go.
And it took the public to say, listen, we like this, you might not like him, but we like him, bring him back. I also like, I have a wee list in the front here. The other authors have taken the stories and kind of, as we both enjoy, reimagined. So for example, Laurie R. King has a character called Mary Russell, and she is out and about and meets this beekeeper, because as we know, Holmes goes to raise bees, and it turns out it's Holmes, so it's about her with Holmes in the background. We've got the wonderful Horowitz, who wrote 2 books, one of them being Moriarty, which was about what happened after the Rhinebeck Falls, and it's just a wonderful book because he takes what you think you know and kind of changes it, and I won't spoil it with a twist. But we also have Robert Ryan, who took Watson, and he now kind of solves mysteries and things with Sherlock in the background, very much in the background, you know, just kind of appearing every now and again with a good idea.
Interesting.
And we also have Michelle Birkby, I think her name was, who took the women of Baker Street and gave them a story. So Mrs. Hudson and Watson's wife gave them kind of, again, Sherlock's in the background, he appears every now and again, but it's more about their story, and you know, the runners, they kind of, you know, feed them in the kitchen when they come to tell Sherlock something really important, and their kind of story. So for those fans that wrote to Doyle and said, you know, you must keep this, he's still going in his way, you know, the stories are still, you know, happening.
One of my favourites, I think, is Enola Holmes.
Yes.
Which is like, I watched the TV series or movie, whatever, first, and I read the graphic novel adaptations of the young adult books next, and I just loved both of them. It's exactly for the reason that you're saying, that it is like, it's ongoing, so it's like things that are familiar, so you know the canon of Sherlock and Moriarty and like whatever, Watson, but it's taking it onward, so it's in the same world but it's with different people,
and that's good, you know, that's not stealing anything away from Conan Doyle's original idea. It's kind of developing it and making it more accessible for people now. You know, that, you know, Victorian London or whatever, you know, they kind of they see that, or they make it modern but with a similar twist to it, if you see what I mean.
And I also feel like it talks so much of the sense of real connection and ownership that people feel for this world and for these characters, that they don't, like, obviously it's now really old as well, but still popular, like in the original thing, but also that they're still so fascinated, or we are still so fascinated by this world, that they want to take things out that they like and just play around with it a bit, which I love.
I like the Robert Ryan ones as well, because you're heading into the World Wars at that point, and it's interesting to see where he takes the characters and how they would deal with the things that are going on. So, you know, originally, you know, Watson meets Holmes through, you know, things, but, you know, what happens next? How do they deal with, to them, the modern world, you know, how they go forward from, you know, being in Baker Street and, you know, that kind of small world they were in to world things happening. It's quite interesting, and I think most of the authors do that really well. There is an author that I've not read, is it James Lovelace or something like that, who again kind of goes down a horror route. And as we know, Conan Doyle was quite into you know, that kind of a thing. So I'm quite interested, although horror's not my thing. I quite like the idea.
But that's the thing, it can be anybody's and everybody's, just like you do your thing and you'll find an audience.
And as long as it comes back, as long as people remember that, you know, Conan Doyle was the one that kind of invented these people, and people are still interested in that. I quite like that.
Well, I think we should be happy with all our waterfalls, literal and metaphorical. What about next time? What are we going to be talking about?
So next time she has given us the theme of Stranger in Town.
I feel like Sherlock could fit a little bit into that. He was often the stranger in town.
And Mother's story. You know, she goes to this island. She's kind of the stranger on the island.
We've just recorded 2 episodes in one. But I think maybe we'll find some other things. We will. Make it fit weirdly into the theme. But yes, thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.
Bye.